There are moments in life when nothing on the outside seems different, yet something deep within begins to shift. You may feel restless without knowing why, or strangely calm in the middle of uncertainty. This is not confusion, it is preparation. When the future is ready to change, the unconscious begins to speak first, long before the world catches up. The message does not arrive loudly. It comes as a quiet pressure, a sense that the old way of being no longer fits who you are becoming. Often this moment appears after delay, disappointment, or repetition. You may notice the same patterns returning, the same questions resurfacing, the same inner tension refusing to disappear. This is not punishment or failure. It is life insisting that awareness must grow before circumstances can change. The future cannot arrive while the inner structure that must hold it is still forming. What feels like stagnation is often a period of invisible construction. As this message appears, old identities begin to loosen. What once defined you, roles, ambitions, expectations, may feel strangely empty. This is unsettling because the mind wants certainty, not transition. Yet meaning is not lost here, it is being rearranged. The psyche clears space by dissolving what is outdated. Only when the false sense of self weakens can something more authentic emerge. You may also notice an increased sensitivity to truth. Distractions lose their power. Superficial goals feel hollow. You become less interested in chasing and more attentive to observing. This shift is crucial. Change does not begin with action, it begins with seeing. When awareness deepens, the right direction no longer needs to be forced. It reveals itself naturally. The future changes when you stop resisting what is asking to be integrated. The qualities you avoided, the emotions you suppressed, the parts of yourself you denied, these now seek recognition. Growth requires wholeness, not perfection. By facing what was hidden, you reclaim energy that was once spent on avoidance. This reclaimed energy becomes the foundation of your next phase. When this message appears, it is not telling you to rush forward. It is asking you to stand still long enough to understand what is ending and what is being born. Once this inner alignment occurs, the outer world responds effortlessly. Opportunities, clarity, and direction begin to synchronize, not because you chased them, but because you are finally ready to receive them. Inner change rarely announces itself with clarity or force. It does not arrive as a dramatic revelation or a sudden decision that everything must be different. Instead, it moves beneath the surface, subtle and almost unnoticeable, shaping the inner landscape long before anything visible begins to shift. At first, this change feels like a faint unease, a quiet dissatisfaction with familiar routines or beliefs that once felt stable. Nothing may appear wrong on the outside, yet something within no longer aligns. This early stage is often misunderstood as confusion, boredom, or restlessness, but it is actually the first sign that transformation has already begun. The mind tends to look for external causes to explain this feeling. It searches for something to fix, improve, or escape. Yet inner change does not start with action, it starts with awareness. A growing sensitivity develops toward thoughts, emotions, and patterns that previously went unnoticed. Old reactions feel exaggerated, old goals lose their emotional pull, and familiar successes bring less satisfaction. This is not because life has lost meaning, but because the inner framework that once interpreted meaning is slowly rearranging itself. The psyche is questioning what it has accepted without reflection. During this quiet shift, contradictions often emerge. A person may feel both drawn toward change and afraid of it at the same time. There is a sense of standing between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The past feels easingly restrictive, while the future remains undefined. This in-between state can be uncomfortable, because the ego prefers certainty and clear direction. Yet this tension is necessary. Without it, the individual would never loosen their grip on outdated identities, beliefs, or emotional attachments that no longer support growth. As inner change deepens, the individual begins to notice patterns repeating in their life. Similar conflicts, relationships, or obstacles appear again and again, demanding attention. These repetitions are not random. They act as mirrors, reflecting unresolved inner material that seeks recognition. When these signals are ignored, life appears stagnant. When they are observed with honesty, understanding begins to replace frustration. Insight slowly transforms emotional reactions, and what once felt like fate begins to feel like communication. This internal transformation requires patience because it unfolds in silence. There may be no external validation, no immediate reward, and no visible progress. In fact, from the outside, life may appear unchanged or even stalled. Yet internally, perception is shifting. Values are being refined, priorities are being questioned. The individual becomes less reactive and more reflective, less driven by compulsion and more guided by awareness. This inner reorientation changes how experiences are interpreted, even before circumstances themselves change. Eventually, when inner alignment reaches a certain depth, external life begins to respond. Decisions become clearer, actions more intentional, and choices more authentic. Opportunities appear not as sudden miracles, but as natural extensions of a transformed inner state. What looks like an external breakthrough is actually the final stage of a process that began long ago in silence. The world changes only after the individual has already changed within. Delays and repeated patterns often feel like evidence that something has gone wrong. When progress seems slow, or life presents the same challenges again and again, the mind quickly labels the experience as failure or bad luck. Yet this interpretation overlooks a deeper process at work. What appears as delay is frequently a period of preparation, and what feels like repetition is often an invitation to develop the awareness required for genuine change. Life does not withhold movement arbitrarily. It pauses to ensure that the inner foundation is strong enough to support what comes next. Repeated patterns are especially revealing. The same types of relationships, conflicts, disappointments, or emotional reactions reappear even when circumstances change. This can be frustrating, as if effort leads nowhere. However, repetition is not meant to trap, it is meant to teach. Each recurrence highlights something within that has not yet been fully understood or integrated. Until the lesson beneath the pattern is recognized, life continues to present it in different forms. The outer situation changes, but the inner response remains the same, and so the experience feels identical. Delays serve a similar function. When outcomes do not arrive on the expected timeline, impatience and self-doubt tend to grow. The ego interprets waiting as wasted time, believing progress should be constant and visible. Yet inner development does not follow linear schedules. Certain qualities, discernment, emotional maturity, resilience, cannot be rushed. They form through reflection, endurance, and repeated exposure to challenge. A delay allows these qualities to develop quietly, even when there is no external evidence of advancement. Often delays protect against premature outcomes. Receiving what one desires before being psychologically prepared can lead to instability, misuse, or dissatisfaction. What seems like a missed opportunity may actually be a safeguard, preventing growth from collapsing under its own weight. Life waits until intention, capacity, and awareness align. Only then can progress be sustained rather than temporary. From this perspective, delay is not denial, it is timing guided by deeper intelligence. As awareness increases, the emotional response to repetition begins to shift. Instead of reacting with frustration or blame, curiosity emerges. Questions replace assumptions. Why does this situation continue to appear? What inner stance am I repeating? What am I refusing to see? This change in attitude marks a turning point. The pattern no longer controls the individual, it becomes a source of insight. Once the underlying issue is understood, the repetition loses its purpose and naturally dissolves. Preparation often feels invisible because it does not produce immediate results. It reshapes perception rather than circumstances. During this time, values are clarified, illusions are dismantled, and expectations are refined. The individual becomes more honest about their motivations and limitations. This inner restructuring is essential. Without it, progress would be shallow and unstable, easily undone by pressure or disappointment. When the preparation is complete, movement resumes effortlessly. What once required force now unfolds naturally. The same situations that cause stagnation no longer appear, or if they do, they no longer carry the same emotional charge. From the outside, it may seem like sudden progress, but internally the work was done during the period that once felt like failure. Delays and repetitions were never obstacles, they were the training ground for transformation. Old identities do not disappear easily because they once provided structure, direction, and a sense of belonging. They are built from past experiences, expectations, roles, and the need to be accepted or successful in a particular way. For a long time, these identities feel stable and necessary, shaping how a person understands themselves and their place in the world. Yet growth demands movement, and what once protected or defined the self can eventually become restrictive. When an identity has fulfilled its purpose, it begins to loosen, not as a loss, but as a natural progression towards something more truthful. The dissolution of an old identity often begins quietly. A person may notice that achievements no longer bring satisfaction, or that familiar labels feel hollow. The role that once gave meaning starts to feel like a performance rather than an expression of the self. This creates discomfort because identity offers certainty, and losing it feels like losing ground. The mind resists this process, clinging to what is known, even when it no longer aligns with inner reality. Yet this discomfort is not a sign of regression, it is evidence that growth is underway. As old identities weaken, a period of uncertainty follows. Without clear definitions, the individual may feel invisible, unmotivated, or disconnected. This in-between state can feel like emptiness, but it is actually space. The psyche is clearing what is outdated to allow something more authentic to emerge. During this time, comparisons to others often intensify as the ego searches for something familiar to hold on to. However, authentic growth cannot be modeled entirely on external examples. It must arise from inner alignment. Letting go of old identities also means releasing unconscious attachments. Many identities are formed as adaptations to gain approval, avoid rejection, or meet expectations imposed by family, culture, or circumstance. When these identities dissolve, the emotions tied to them surface. Fear, grief, or guilt may appear, as if something valuable is being lost. In truth, what is being released is not the self, but the conditions placed upon it. This emotional processing is essential, because unacknowledged attachments will attempt to recreate the same identities in new forms. As the inner landscape shifts, awareness deepens. Instead of asking who they should be, the individual begins to ask who they truly are beneath conditioning. Tension moves inward, toward values, instincts, and quiet truths that were previously overshadowed by roles and expectations. This stage requires patience, as authenticity cannot be forced. It reveals itself gradually through observation, honesty, and the willingness to remain undefined for a time. Eventually, new expressions of self begin to take shape, not as rigid identities, but as flexible orientations toward life. The individual acts with greater integrity, guided less by approval and more by inner coherence. Choices feel simpler, not because life has fewer challenges, but because decisions are no longer filtered through outdated self-concepts. What emerges is not a new mask, but a deeper sense of alignment between inner truth and outer action. Authentic growth is not about becoming someone entirely different. It is about uncovering what was always present but obscured. Old identities dissolve so that the essential self can move freely. In this freedom, growth becomes less about proving worth and more about expressing it naturally. Meaningful action does not arise from urgency or impulse, but from a depth of awareness that understands both the inner and outer situation clearly. Before any action carries lasting impact, there is a period of observation in which the individual begins to notice patterns, motivations, and reactions without immediately trying to change them. This stage is often overlooked because it appears passive and unproductive. Yet without it, action tends to be driven by fear, habit, or unconscious desire, leading to repeated outcomes rather than genuine progress. Awareness begins with turning attention inward. Thoughts, emotions, and bodily responses are noticed as they arise, rather than being acted upon automatically. This shift creates a small but powerful space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice becomes possible. Instead of reacting in familiar ways, the individual starts to see how certain behaviors are conditioned responses shaped by past experiences. This recognition weakens the grip of automatic patterns and reveals where energy has been unconsciously spent. Observation also extends outward. Situations, relationships, and challenges are viewed more objectively without immediately labeling them as good or bad. This broader perspective allows reality to be seen as it is, rather than as it is feared or desired to be. When perception is clear, action no longer needs to be defensive or forced. It becomes responsive, arising from understanding rather than compulsion. The quality of action changes, even if the action itself appears similar on the surface. Many people rush to act because stillness feels uncomfortable. Observation confronts the individual with uncertainty, contradiction, and unresolved emotion. Taking action can temporarily relieve this discomfort by creating the illusion of control. However, actions taken to escape inattention often create new problems, reinforcing the cycle of reaction. Awareness interrupts this cycle by allowing discomfort to be experienced without immediately trying to eliminate it. In doing so, the underlying causes of tension become visible. As observation deepens, intentions become clearer. The individual begins to distinguish between actions motivated by fear or validation and those aligned with deeper values. This clarity prevents wasted effort. Instead of scattering energy across multiple directions, focus naturally narrows toward what truly matters. Meaningful action is not defined by intensity, but by alignment. When action is aligned, it requires less force and produces more sustainable results. Awareness also reveals timing. Not every situation calls for immediate movement. Some require patience, others preparation, some restraint. Observation sharpens intuition, allowing the individual to sense when conditions are ready for action. Acting too early or too late often leads to resistance or missed opportunities. When awareness guides timing, action feels fluid rather than strained, as if moving with life instead of against it. Over time, observation transforms the relationship with action itself. Action is no longer used to prove worth, avoid discomfort, or control outcomes. It becomes an expression of understanding. Even small actions carry weight, because they arise from clarity rather than impulse. Mistakes still occur, but they are met with reflection instead of self-judgment, allowing learning rather than stagnation. Meaningful action is the visible result of an invisible process. It is born from awareness that has patiently observed, questioned, and understood. Without this foundation, action remains repetitive and shallow. With it, even the simplest movement can alter the direction of a life, because it emerges from conscious alignment rather than unconscious habit. True transformation does not come from adding more qualities to the self, but from reclaiming what has been ignored, suppressed, or rejected. Within every person exist aspects that were once deemed unacceptable, inconvenient, or unsafe to express. These parts were often pushed out of awareness in order to adapt, belong, or survive. Over time they became hidden, operating quietly beneath the surface. Avoiding them may create temporary stability, but it also fragments the self, limiting growth and distorting perception. Hidden aspects do not disappear simply because they are ignored. They express themselves indirectly through emotional reactions, recurring conflicts, and unexplained behaviors. A person may overreact to certain situations, feel irrationally blocked, or repeatedly encounter the same challenges without understanding why. These patterns are signals, not flaws. They point toward parts of the psyche that seek recognition. Avoidance keeps these parts unconscious, allowing them to influence life from the shadows. Integration begins with awareness and honesty. Instead of judging or resisting uncomfortable emotions, the individual starts to observe them with curiosity. Fear, anger, envy, grief, or vulnerability are no longer treated as enemies to overcome, but as messengers carrying important information. This shift in attitude is crucial. Judgment reinforces division, while understanding creates connection. When a hidden part is allowed to be seen without condemnation, its intensity often softens. As these aspects are brought into awareness, memories, beliefs, and emotions associated with them begin to surface. This process can be unsettling because it challenges the carefully constructed self-image. The individual may realize that traits they disowned, such as assertiveness, sensitivity, or desire, were never inherently negative, but became associated with pain or rejection in the past. Recognizing this breaks the illusion that wholeness requires perfection. Instead, wholeness emerges through inclusion. Integration does not mean acting out every impulse or identifying entirely with hidden traits. It means acknowledging their existence and understanding their role. For example, suppressed anger may carry the energy needed for healthy boundaries, while denied vulnerability may hold the key to genuine connection. Reactions become more measured, choices more authentic, and relationships more honest. The individual no longer projects disowned parts onto others, reducing unnecessary conflict. Instead of being driven by unconscious patterns, actions arise from a broader understanding of the self. This is where true transformation occurs, not through force or self-improvement, but through reconciliation. Transformation rooted in integration is lasting because it addresses the whole person. It does not collapse under pressure, because nothing essential is being denied. By welcoming what was hidden, the individual becomes more complete, and from this completeness, growth unfolds naturally. The future does not change through force, struggle, or constant effort to control outcomes. It shifts when inner alignment quietly takes place. Inner alignment occurs when thoughts, emotions, values, and actions begin to move in the same direction, no longer pulling against one another. Before this alignment, life often feels fragmented. A person may want one thing, fear another, and act in a way that contradicts both. This inner conflict creates confusion and stagnation, making progress feel exhausting and uncertain. As inner alignment begins, awareness increases. The individual becomes more honest with themselves about what truly matters and what no longer belongs. Old desires driven by comparison, fear, or external expectation lose their intensity. In their place, a calmer sense of direction emerges. This does not always arrive as certainty, but as a quiet knowing. Choices begin to feel simpler, not because options disappear, but because the inner noise that once distorted perception starts to settle. Alignment also changes the relationship with effort. When inner motives are divided, effort feels heavy and forced. Actions require constant self-persuasion and external validation. Once alignment is achieved, effort becomes more efficient. Energy is no longer wasted on resistance or doubt. Even difficult tasks feel lighter because they are supported by inner coherence. The individual no longer needs to push themselves into action. Movement arises naturally from clarity. This inner shift alters how the world responds. Opportunities that once felt blocked begin to appear, not as sudden miracles, but as logical extensions of a new inner state. Conversations change, relationships reorganize, and circumstances subtly rearrange themselves. What is often described as luck or perfect timing is actually alignment meeting opportunity. When inner intentions are clear, the individual recognizes openings that were previously overlooked or dismissed. Fear also loses its dominance as alignment deepens. Fear thrives on inner contradiction, feeding on uncertainty and unresolved conflict. When alignment is present, fear may still arise, but it no longer dictates behavior. The individual trusts their inner compass enough to move forward without needing complete assurance. This trust creates momentum. Decisions are made with integrity rather than desperation, and outcomes feel more meaningful, regardless of external results. Importantly, alignment does not eliminate challenges. The future does not shift into a state of permanent ease. Instead, challenges are experienced differently. They no longer feel like signs of being off track, but like necessary steps within a coherent journey. Setbacks are met with reflection rather than collapse. This resilience allows forward movement to continue even in uncertainty. As inner alignment stabilizes, the future unfolds with less resistance. Life feels less like a battle and more like a dialogue. The individual responds rather than reacts, adapts rather than resists. What once required intense planning and control now unfolds with surprising simplicity. This does not mean passivity, but participation without struggle. The most profound aspect of this shift is that it cannot be forced. The future changes not because one demands it to, but because the inner conditions that once blocked movement have dissolved. Alignment becomes the silent architect of change. From this state, the future no longer needs to be chased. It arrives naturally, shaped by the clarity and coherence that have already taken root within. And so, if this message has reached you, understand that it is not asking you to become someone new, but to stand fully as who you already are. The shifts you feel are not signs of uncertainty, but signals of readiness. What has been forming within you now knows its direction. Trust the quiet alignment taking place beneath the surface, because when the inner world settles into truth, the outer path responds without force. You do not need to rush the future. Once you are aligned, it moves toward you on its own.